Before we dive into this incredible story of fear, redemption, and the true nature of humanity, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what you think humanity's greatest strength really is, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about why the galaxy should fear us and why they should be grateful for that fear. The crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council had never witnessed such chaos. Emergency sirens wailed through the vast dome as holographic displays flickered with images of destruction that defied comprehension. Star systems, entire civilizations, simply vanishing from galactic maps as if they had never existed at. All-High Chancellor Jigstar of the Altarian hegemony stood at the center of the maelstrom, his four arms gesticulating wildly as he tried to maintain order among the panicking representatives of 700 species. His iridescent skin had shifted to deep crimson, a sign of extreme distress that sent ripples of fear through the assembled delegates. Order! Order! His voice boomed through the chamber's acoustics, but the delegates continued their frantic discussions. The reptilian draconians hissed in agitation, their scales flashing warning colors. The ethereal centaurians flickered between dimensions in their anxiety. Even the stoic Titanium Collective's robotic representatives were emitting distress signals in rapid bursts. Admiral Kethfor, the massive draconian military commander, slammed his clawed fist onto the council table, sending tremors through the Kenyan military commander, slammed his clawed fist onto the council table, sending tremors through the council table, sending tremors through the Kenyan military commander. Reinforced structure. Silence. He roared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across 1,000 battlefields. We face extinction, and you squabble like hatchlings. The chamber fell quiet, save for the ominous hum of the emergency systems. Zigstar's image flickered to life above the central podium, displaying the latest tactical reports. The sight that greeted them was nightmare made manifest. "The Scourge has returned," he announced, his voice heavy with the weight of impending doom. 14 star systems have fallen in the past 72 hours. The Rigel Defense Fleet, 3,000. Ships, our finest warriors, lasted exactly 17 minutes against their advance force. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. The Rigel fleet had been considered the most formidable military force in the galaxy, equipped with the latest quantum weaponry and manned by the Draconian Empire's elite warriors. Ambassador Leranin of the Centaurian Commonwealth materialized at her podium, her translucent form shimmering with barely contained panic. How is this possible? The Scourge was driven into dark space 50,000 years ago. Our ancestors built the barrier world specifically to prevent their return. Admiral Kethfor's expression was grim as he activated his own holographic display. The images that appeared sent chills through even the most hardened military minds present. Ships, if they could be called that seemed to be grown rather than built, their hull plating pulsing with organic rhythms. Weapons that fired not energy or projectiles, but something far worse, tendrils of corruption that turned defending vessels against their own fleets. "They have evolved," Kethfor said, his usual battle-hardened composure cracking slightly. "Their biomechanical technology has advanced beyond our worst projections. They don't just destroy our ships, they consume them, converting our own weapons against us. Every vessel we lose makes them stronger." The silence that followed was deafening. For a civilization that had known relative peace for millennia, the concept of an enemy that grew stronger with each victory was almost incomprehensible. It was Councillor Vexton of the Andromedian Assembly who finally spoke the words that everyone was thinking but no one dared voice. "We need them." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates leaped to their feet, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the cacophony of outrage in 700 different languages. Absolutely not, shrieked the avian representative from Aquila Prime. Have you forgotten what they did to the Zephyrian colonies? The Blood Wars ended 50 years ago for a reason. Added the crystalline entity from the Silicon Imperium. We quarantined Sol System to protect the galaxy from those butchers. Zixtar raised all four arms for silence, his skin cycling through deep shades of purple, the Altarian equivalent of deep thought and internal conflict. Perhaps Counselor Vexton has a point we should consider. The chamber erupted. Again, but this time Admiral Kethfer's roar cut through the chaos. Enough! His yellow eyes swept the assembly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much death to care about political niceties. I fought them, he said quietly, and the chamber stilled. I was there during the Terran conflicts. I commanded the 3rd Draconian Fleet at the Battle of Kepler Station. Do you want to know what I learned about humans? He paused, his gaze distant as memories of battles fought light years away and decades past played behind his eyes. They don't fight wars the way we do. We have honor. We have codes. We follow the established conventions of civilized warfare. His claws extended slightly, scraping against the podium's surface. Humans have no such limitations. They fight like cornered animals, and they always find a way to win. Ambassador Liranin flickered with agitation. They committed genocide against the Altair Mining Collective. They turned inhabited worlds into graveyards. Because those worlds were being used as slave camps, Kethfer replied coldly. Because the collective was harvesting sentient beings. For their neural processors, the humans didn't see military targets, they saw a rescue mission. The uncomfortable truth of his words settled over the chamber like a shroud. The Terran conflicts, as they had become known in galactic history, had begun when humanity first encountered evidence of the galaxy's darker practices. Slavery, genetic manipulation, the harvesting of sentient minds for computational purposes, practices that the galactic community had quietly tolerated for millennia as necessary evils of interstellar commerce. Humanity had taken one look at these practices and declared war, not on any single species or empire, but on the very concept itself. They had fought 7 different conflicts simultaneously, each one a surgical strike aimed at dismantling what they called crimes against sentience. The fact that they had won every single engagement, often against overwhelming odds, had earned them a reputation that transcended mere military prowess. They had become boogeymen. The Terran Defense Force hasn't been seen outside Sol System for 50 years, Zixtar said slowly. We established the quarantine to contain them, yes, but also to ... He paused, his skin shifting to deep blue, the color of admission and vulnerability. To protect ourselves from the knowledge of what we had become. Counselor Vexton stepped forward, his arthropod features clicking with determination. The Scourge will reach the core worlds in 72 hours. Our combined fleets have been unable to slow their advance by even a single day. We are facing extinction. He gestured to the tactical display, where red markers continued to spread like a virus across the galactic map. Perhaps it is time to ask ourselves a question. Would we rather die with our principles intact, or live with the knowledge that we asked monsters to save us? Admiral Kethfer's laugh was bitter and harsh. You still don't understand, do you? He turned to address the full assembly, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. We called them monsters because it was easier than admitting the truth. What truth? Liranin demanded. That they are what we should have been all along. The journey to the Sol System quarantine line took 18 hours through the fastest jump routes available to the emergency diplomatic convoy. Ambassador Liranin found herself aboard the flagship Harmony's Edge, accompanied by Admiral Kethvar and a carefully selected delegation representing the major galactic powers. The quarantine barrier itself was a monument to galactic fear, a network of automated defense platforms, sensor arrays, and warning beacons that formed a perfect sphere around humanity's home system. For 50 years, nothing had gone in or out without explicit galactic authorization. Now, for the first time in half a century, they were about to request permission to enter. "Incoming transmission," announced the ship's AI, and it's perfectly modulated. "Tone, source, sole defense grid. There. They're requesting our intentions." Liranin felt her form flicker with nervousness. After decades of treating humanity as a quarantine threat, how did one even begin such a conversation? "Put them through," Admiral Kethvar commanded, his military bearing helping to mask his own uncertainty. The holographic display materialized, revealing a human face that sent a ripple of recognition through the draconian commander. The woman appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with gray threading through her brown hair and lines around her, eyes that spoke of years spent staring into the darkness between stars. But it was her uniform that truly caught attention, the deep blue of the Terran Defense Force, adorned with rank insignia that had become legend throughout the galaxy. "Admiral Sarah Cross," Kethvar said quietly, his voice carrying a note of respect that surprised even himself. "I didn't expect, Admiral Kethvar," she replied, her tone professional but not hostile. "The Dragon of Vega Prime himself. I heard. You were promoted after our last encounter at Kepler Station. You remember me. I remember all my enemies, Admiral. The question is, are you still my enemy?" The directness of the question caught the assembled diplomats off guard. In their world of carefully parsed language and diplomatic subtlety, such bluntness was almost alien. It was Liranin who answered, her form solidifying as she moved to the center of the transmission array. "Admiral Cross, I am Ambassador Liranin of the Centaurian Commonwealth. We come not as enemies, but as supplicants." Sarah Cross's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Supplicants. That's a word I never thought I'd hear from the Galactic Council. What's changed? The question hung in the air for a moment before Admiral Kethvar stepped forward. "The scourge has returned." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Admiral Cross's composure cracked, her eyes widening with something that might have been fear or anticipation. "Show me," she said simply. The next 30 minutes were spent transmitting every piece of intelligence the galactic forces had managed to gather about the Scourge's return. Tactical reports, sensor readings, recorded final transmissions from dying ships. All of it painted a picture of an enemy that had grown beyond the nightmares of the past. Admiral Cross studied each piece of data with the intensity of a predator. Analyzing prey, her questions sharp and precise. She wanted to know everything. Ship configurations, weapons effects, communication patterns, the rate of technological adaptation. "They've learned," she said finally, her voice carrying a note of professional admiration that chilled the assembled delegates. 50,000 years in dark space, and they've learned from every mistake that led to their first defeat. Can they be stopped? Liranin asked, her form flickering with desperation. Admiral Cross was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as she processed the implications of what she had seen. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Yes, but not by you." The bluntness of the statement hit the diplomatic convoy like a physical blow. Admiral Kethvar's claws extended involuntarily, and Liranin's form became nearly transparent with shock. "You're asking us to save the galaxy that spent 50 years treating us like criminals," Admiral Cross continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "The same galaxy that calls us butchers and monsters, that quarantined us like a plague to be contained." "Admiral," Kethfor began, but she cut him off with a gesture. I'm not finished. You want to know what we've been doing for the past 50 years while you congratulated yourselves on containing the human threat? We've been preparing. She gestured off-screen, and the transmission field expanded to show what lay behind her. The assembled delegates gasped in collective shock. They were looking at the bridge of a ship unlike anything in their databases. The surfaces seemed to shift and flow like living metal, while displays showed information in configurations that hurt to look at directly. Energy patterns flowed through conduits that existed in more dimensions than the eye could process. We knew they would come back, Admiral Cross said, her voice taking on the tone of someone revealing a long-held secret. The Scourge doesn't give up. They don't accept defeat. They adapt, they evolve, and they return. So we've spent 50 years doing the same. She walked to a console that seemed to respond to her thoughts rather than her touch, bringing up displays that showed fleet movements throughout the Sol system. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of ships, each one incorporating technologies that the galactic community had deemed impossible or too dangerous to pursue. You see, while you were building a civilized galaxy based on rules and conventions, we were asking a different question. What if the next threat doesn't follow those rules? What if the next enemy doesn't care about honor or restraint or the sanctity of civilian targets? The implications of her words began to sink in, and Luranen found her voice. You've been planning for this specific war for 50 years, Ambassador. Every day, every hour, every resource we had was dedicated to a single purpose, making sure that when the Scourge returned, we would be ready. Admiral Kethfor leaned forward, his military mind grasping the scope of what she was describing. Your entire civilization has been mobilized for war. Not war, Admiral. Extinction prevention. Her expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of the human being beneath the military commander. We learned something during our conflicts with the galaxy. Fighting for conquest is easy. Fighting for survival is harder. But fighting for someone else's survival when they hate you for it, that's the hardest thing of all. The transmission fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the diplomatic convoy. Finally, it was Counselor Vexton who spoke the question they were all thinking. What do you want in return? Admiral Cross's smile was sad and knowing. We want to come home. The negotiation that followed was unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. Normally, such discussions would take months of careful preparation, with teams of specialists analyzing every clause and implication. Now, with the Scourge advance continuing its inexorable approach toward the core worlds, they had hours. Admiral Cross's demands were surprisingly straightforward. Full citizenship for all human colonies, formal recognition of Terran sovereignty, and most importantly, an official apology from the Galactic Council for the quarantine. 50 years, she said quietly during one of the brief recesses. 50 years of being treated like criminals for fighting against slavery and genocide. Do you have any idea what that does to a species' psychology? It was Admiral Kethfor who answered, his voice carrying a weight of understanding that surprised everyone present. It makes you stronger, and it makes you very, very dangerous. It made us lonely, Admiral Cross corrected. But yes, it also made us dangerous. The question now is whether that danger will be turned toward protecting the galaxy or... She left. The implication hanging the breakthrough came when Luranen made a suggestion that shocked even her own delegation. What if we offered more than apologies? What if we offered integration? Integration? Vexton's S-translator struggled with the concept. Full membership in the Galactic Council. Not just citizenship, but leadership roles. Humans have proven their military capabilities. Perhaps it's time we acknowledge their moral authority as well. The The silence that followed was profound. The idea of humans, the species they had spent 50 years portraying as barely controlled savages, taking leadership roles in galactic civilization was almost incomprehensible. It was Admiral Cross who broke the silence. "You're serious?" "The galaxy needs protecting," Liranen said simply. "You've proven you're willing to fight for those who can't protect themselves, even when it costs you everything. Perhaps ... Perhaps we've been afraid of the wrong thing all along." Admiral Cross studied the assembled delegates for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded once, sharply. "Acceptable. But understand this. If we do this, we do it our way. No rules of engagement that prioritize property over lives. No political considerations that put civilians at risk. And no interference when we make the hard choices that civilized beings can't stomach." "Agreed," Admiral Kethfer said immediately, his military instincts recognizing the necessity of what she was describing. "Then welcome to the Terran War," Admiral Cross said, her smile carrying all the warmth of a supernova. "Try to keep up." The first thing that became apparent when the quarantine barriers came down was the sheer scale of human preparation. As the diplomatic convoy entered Sol System, they were greeted by a sight that redefined their understanding of military readiness. Ships, thousands upon thousands of ships, arranged in formations that spoke of decades of planning and preparation. But these weren't the vessels that had fought in the Terran conflicts 50 years ago. These were something entirely new, sleek, predatory designs that seemed to bend light around their hulls, their surfaces covered in weapon systems that defied easy classification. "By the void," Admiral Kethfer breathed, his professional composure finally cracking. "How many ships do you have?" Admiral Cross, now aboard the diplomatic vessel as they made their way toward Earth, checked a display that showed real-time fleet. "Positions. Active combat vessels? About 30,000. But that's just the first wave." "First wave?" Liranen's form flickered with disbelief. "We've been building for 50 years, Ambassador. Every human colony, every orbital facility, every resource we could gather has been dedicated to this moment. We have shipyards in the asteroid belt that could construct a dreadnought in 72 hours. We have weapons platforms hidden in the Oort cloud that could glass a planet from 20 light years away." She gestured toward Earth, which was slowly growing larger in the view screen. "But more importantly, we have something the Scourge has never encountered before, which is humans who are very, very angry and who have had 50 years to think about it." As they approached Earth orbit, the scope of human industrial capacity became apparent. The planet was surrounded by a network of orbital platforms, each one bristling with manufacturing equipment and defensive systems. But it was the construction in progress that truly caught attention, ships that dwarfed anything in the galactic databases, their hulls being assembled by automated systems that worked with impossible precision. "What are those?" "Counselor," Vexton asked, pointing at the massive vessels. "Scourge killers," Admiral Cross replied matter-of-factly. "We spent 50 years studying every piece of intelligence we could gather about their biology, their technology, their tactics. Those ships are designed for one purpose: fighting an enemy that adapts to conventional weapons." She brought up a holographic display showing the specifications of one of the massive vessels. The assembled aliens stared in fascination and horror at weapon systems that seemed to violate several galactic conventions on humane warfare. Quantum disruptors that target biomechanical neural pathways. Viral code generators that corrupt hive mind communication networks. Nanite swarms that specifically target Scourge genetic markers. Admiral Cross's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone describing pest control rather than weapons of war. "And that's just the standard loadout." Admiral Kethfer leaned. Forward, his military mind trying to process the implications. These weapons, they're designed to cause suffering. They're designed to cause fear, Admiral Cross corrected. The Scourge operates as a hive mind. They share experiences, memories, sensations. A weapon that merely kills is just a tactical loss. A weapon that traumatizes the entire collective consciousness. The realization hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just spent 50 years preparing to fight the humans hadn't just spent 50 years preparing to fight the years, to fight the Dio. Scourge, they had spent 50 years learning how to psychologically torture a hive mind. That's... Lyranen began, then stopped, her form flickering as she struggled to find words. Monstrous? Admiral Cross suggested. Yes, it is. But then again, so are we. That's why you came to us, remember? The first engagement came 18 hours later at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. The Scourge had been advancing steadily through the outer colonies, consuming everything in their path with methodical efficiency. Intelligence suggested they would reach the system's inhabited worlds within 6 hours. They never got the chance. Admiral Cross stood in the command center of the TDF flagship Inevitable, watching tactical displays that showed the human fleet moving into position. Around her, officers worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire lives. Scourge Advance Force detected, reported Commander Martinez from the sensor station. Approximately 300 vessels standard. Biomechanical configuration. They're following predictable advancement patterns. Good, Admiral Cross replied. Predictable makes this easier. Signal all ships. Implement Protocol Omega-7. What followed would be studied by military strategists for generations to come, assuming there were any generations left to study it. The human fleet didn't engage the Scourge in anything resembling conventional battle. Instead, they simply disappeared. Stealth technology that bent light and gravity around their ships rendered the entire human force invisible to Scourge sensors. For 17 minutes, the biomechanical ships continued their advance, unaware that they were being surrounded by an enemy that had spent half a century learning every detail of their capabilities. When the attack came, it was from all directions. Simultaneously, quantum disruptors fired in carefully choreographed sequences, targeting the neural pathways that connected individual Scourge ships to the collective consciousness. The effect was immediate and devastating. Ships that had operated with perfect coordination suddenly found themselves deaf, blind, and isolated. But that was just the opening move. Deploy the viral packages, Admiral Cross ordered, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. From concealed launch tubes, millions of microscopic drones swarmed toward the confused Scourge vessels. Each drone carried a payload designed by 50 years of dedicated research. Corrupted code that would infiltrate the biomechanical systems and introduce chaos into the collective consciousness. The effect was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Scourge ships began turning on each other, their corrupted navigation systems interpreting fellow vessels as threats. The orderly advance dissolved into chaos as the hive mind found itself at war with itself. Phase 2, Admiral Cross announced. Let's show them what humans learned about fear. The second wave of human ships decloaked directly among the Scourge formation, close enough that their weapons couldn't miss. But instead of firing conventional weapons, they deployed something far more insidious: nanite swarms that targeted the organic components of Scourge vessels. These weren't designed to destroy, they were designed to modify. Scourge ships found their hull plating changing color, displaying images that had been carefully chosen to maximize psychological impact. Images of human children. Images of families. Images of everything the Scourge sought to consume, now displayed. On their own vessels in accusation and defiance. The nanites are also transmitting sensory data, Commander Martinez reported, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and horror. Every ship they infect becomes a broadcast node. The entire Scourge collective is experiencing human emotions directly. It was this last element that broke the Scourge formation entirely. A hive mind that had spent eons perfecting collective. Consciousness suddenly found itself flooded with the chaotic individual thoughts and feelings of humanity. Love, fear, rage, compassion, defiance, all of it transmitted directly into their shared awareness. The result was predictable. The first retreat in Scourge history. Pursuit? Commander Martinez asked as the biomechanical ships fled into disarray. Negative, Admiral Cross replied. Let them run. Let them carry the memory of this engagement back to the collective. Let them know that humanity is coming. She turned to address the communication channel that connected her to the galactic observers who had been monitoring the engagement. Admiral. Kethver's face appeared on the main screen, his expression one of professional respect mixed with barely concealed terror. Admiral Cross, he said carefully, that was ... comprehensive. That was a probe, Admiral Kethver. A small advance force designed to test their capabilities and gather intelligence. Her smile was the kind that made predators reconsider their life choices. Would you like to see what we do to their main fleet? Hey there, incredible humans. I know this is getting intense, and we're just getting to the best part. If you're as amazed as I am by humanity's incredible preparation and tactical genius, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think our secret weapon really is. Because trust me, the galaxy is about to learn why they should have been thanking us instead of fearing us. The main Scourge fleet was detected 3 days later, emerging from dark space at the edge of the Vega system. The force was beyond anything the galaxy had prepared for, over 10,000 biomechanical vessels, ranging from frigate-sized scouts to planet killers that dwarf the largest space stations. What made the sight even more terrifying was their formation. Unlike the chaotic swarm tactics the Scourge had used in their previous encounters, this fleet moved with mathematical precision. They had learned from their advance forces' encounter with humanity, and they were adapting. They're not taking any chances. Admiral Cross observed from the bridge of the inevitable, studying the tactical displays with professional interest. Look at those sensor grids, overlapping coverage, redundant communication links, distributed command structure. They're specifically designed to counter our stealth technology and viral warfare. Admiral Kethver, now serving as the galactic liaison aboard the human flagship, studied the formation with growing unease. That's not just adaptation. That's evolution. They've restructured their entire tactical doctrine in 3 days. Impressive, Admiral Cross agreed, but not unexpected. We've been planning for this level of adaptation for 50 years. She activated the ship's communication system, broadcasting on frequencies that reached every human vessel in the fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Cross. Execute Operation Prometheus. Authorization code. Remember Earth. What happened next would be remembered as the moment humanity revealed the true scope of their preparation. Throughout the solar system, previously hidden installations began to activate. Asteroid bases that had masqueraded as mining operations for decades suddenly revealed themselves as massive weapons platforms. Comet shepherding stations unveiled themselves as mobile fortress ships. Even the solar collection arrays around the system star revealed hidden capabilities as they began redirecting stellar energy into focused beams. But the real revelation came when Admiral Cross activated the final component of Operation Prometheus. Computer, activate the Lazarus Array. Lazarus Array? Admiral Kethver asked. But his question was answered before Admiral Cross could reply. Space itself began to distort around the edges of the system. Reality seemed to fold and twist as massive. Structures phased into normal space-time, structures that had been hidden not just from sensors, but from the very fabric of reality itself. Ships, thousands upon thousands of ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything in the active fleet. These weren't the vessels that had been built over the past 50 years. These were something else entirely. After the Terran conflicts, we made a decision, Admiral Cross explained, her voice carrying the weight of a secret finally revealed. We decided that if the galaxy ever needed us again, we would be ready. Not just ready to fight, but ready to win absolutely and decisively. The ships of the Lazarus Array were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their hulls seemed to exist. In multiple dimensions simultaneously, their weapon systems drew power directly from quantum fluctuations, and their design philosophy was based on a single terrifying principle. They were built to fight gods. How many? Admiral Kethfer asked, his voice barely a whisper. 47,000 active combat vessels, Admiral Cross replied. Another 100,000 in reserve. Every human colony, every orbital habitat, every space station has spent 50 years contributing to this moment. She gestured toward the main display where the combined human fleet was taking formation. But Admiral, numbers aren't our advantage here. Our advantage is that we understand something the Scourge doesn't. Which is the difference between fighting for survival and fighting for someone else's survival. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The Scourge fleet, expecting to face conventional forces, found themselves confronted by an enemy that operated according to principles they couldn't comprehend. Human ships moved in patterns that defied military logic, executing maneuvers that prioritized protecting galactic refugee fleets over tactical advantage. They threw themselves into suicidal attacks not to gain ground, but to buy time for civilian evacuations. They used their most advanced weapons not to destroy enemy vessels, but to disable them in ways that prevented them from harming non-combatants. They're fighting a completely different war, Admiral Kethfor observed. Watching human ships sacrifice themselves to protect a convoy of Centaurian civilians. They're not trying to defeat the Scourge, they're trying to save everyone else. Admiral Cross nodded, her attention split between tactical coordination and the broader strategic picture. The Scourge operates on the principle of consumption and assimilation. They understand territory, resources, strategic advantage. But they don't understand sacrifice. On the main display, a human destroyer was shown ramming a Scourge bioship that had been pursuing a damaged hospital ship. The human vessel was destroyed instantly, but the collision disabled the Scourge ship's propulsion, allowing the medical vessel to escape. That pilot had 3 children, Admiral Cross said quietly. He volunteered for that mission specifically because he knew the hospital ship was carrying pediatric patients from the Rigel colonies. The implications of her words hit Admiral Kethfor like a physical blow. Your entire strategy is based on sacrifice. Our entire civilization is based on sacrifice, she corrected. That's what the galaxy never understood about us. We don't fight because we enjoy violence. We fight because someone has to, and we're willing to pay the price that others can't. The turning point came when the Scourge attempted their most devastating attack, a coordinated assault on Earth itself. Over 2,000 bioships broke from the main engagement to strike at humanity's homeworld, expecting to break human morale by threatening their place of origin. Instead, they discovered that Earth had been turned into the most heavily fortified world in galactic history, planetary. Defense grids that could target individual ships from 3 light years away. Atmospheric processors that could generate localized space-time distortions. Even the planet's magnetic field had been weaponized, creating barriers that could deflect energy weapons and disrupt biomechanical systems. But the Scourge's real surprise came when they attempted to land ground forces. Every human on Earth, all 12 billion of them, had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. Not just the military, but civilians who had trained for decades in asymmetric warfare. The planet's entire population had become a single, unified defense force. Children who had learned to build explosives in primary school, elderly citizens who had memorized the biological weak points of every known Scourge variant, teachers, doctors, artists, and engineers who had all mastered the art of killing biomechanical invaders with improvised weapons. The Scourge, accustomed to facing military forces with clear command structures and predictable tactics, found themselves fighting an entire world where every citizen was a potential threat. Every building was a potential fortress, and every street corner was a potential ambush point. They're not just defending their homeworld, Admiral Kethfer realized, watching the tactical feeds with growing awe. They've turned their entire civilization into a weapon. A weapon with a conscience, Admiral Cross agreed. Watch the civilian evacuation protocols. Even as they fought with desperate ferocity, the human defenders were simultaneously executing the largest evacuation operation in galactic history. Refugee ships from across the galaxy were being guided to safe zones, supplied with resources, and protected by human forces that never once prioritized their own survival over that of the aliens they were defending. It was this final demonstration that broke the Scourge collective consciousness entirely. A hive mind that understood only consumption and assimilation found itself confronted by beings who would willingly die to protect strangers from other species. The cognitive dissonance was too great for their shared awareness to process. For the first time in their existence, the Scourge experienced doubt. "Sir," Commander Martinez reported, his voice tight with disbelief, "the Scourge fleet is withdrawing. All vessels are pulling back to minimum safe distance." Admiral Cross studied the tactical display with satisfaction. "Signal the fleet. Cease offensive operations, but maintain defensive positions. Open a channel to the Scourge command ship." "You're going to negotiate?" Admiral Kethfer asked. "I'm going to offer them something they've never been offered before," Admiral Cross replied. "A chance to learn." The communication that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. For the first time, the Scourge collective consciousness spoke directly to another species not as predator to prey, but as one intelligence attempting to understand another. The voice that emerged from the communication array was a harmony of millions, yet somehow coherent enough to be understood. "Human entities," it said, the words struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in Scourge experience. "You sacrifice for not you. This pattern is incomprehensible." Admiral Cross stepped forward, her voice calm and patient. "It's called compassion. It means caring about others even when it costs you something. Compassion concept contradicts survival imperative. Why choose death for others over life for self? Because survival isn't just about staying alive," Admiral Cross replied. "It's about making sure the things you care about survive too. And we care about more than just ourselves." The silence that followed stretched for several minutes as the Scourge collective processed this information. When they spoke again, their voice carried a note that might have been confusion. "We consume to become stronger. You sacrifice to make others stronger. This pattern suggests ... alternative existence model." Admiral Cross smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it was a genuinely warm expression. "It's called civilization. And if you're interested, we'd be willing to teach you." 6 months later, the transformed galaxy bore little resemblance to the civilization that had existed before the Scourge's return. The quarantine around Sol System had been formally dissolved, replaced by a new structure that recognized humanity, not as a contained threat, but as the protective backbone of galactic civilization. Admiral Sarah Cross, now bearing the title of Protector General of the Galactic Defense Force, stood in the rebuilt council chambers on Galactic Central. Around her, representatives from 700 species worked together on problems that would have been unthinkable just a year before. The most remarkable change, however, was the presence of Scourge representatives, biomechanical entities, that had chosen to separate from the collective consciousness and learn about individual existence. They moved awkwardly through the chamber, still adapting to concepts like personal identity and independent thought, but their commitment to learning was undeniable. Status report from the Frontier Protection Initiative, announced General Marcus Webb, Admiral Cross's former deputy who had been promoted to head the new organization, responsible for protecting developing civilizations from external threats. 17. New species have been contacted this month, he reported. All have been offered protection and assistance with no requirements for political alignment or resource sharing. The Vegan Confederation has requested help establishing their first interstellar colonies. The crystalline matrices want assistance with bioform interaction protocols. Ambassador Larinin, now serving as the Council's liaison to human operations, flickered with satisfaction. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Species that had been hiding from galactic contact for millennia are emerging, knowing they'll be protected rather than exploited. Admiral Cross nodded, but her attention was focused on a particular section of the status report. What about the Scourge Integration Program? It was Entity 7, one of the first Scourge individuals to achieve independent consciousness, who answered. Its biomechanical form had been modified to allow for individual thought processes, and it still struggled with the concept of personal pronouns. I am learning about protection concepts, it said, its voice a strange harmony of mechanical precision and emerging emotion. The individual existence requires responsibility for others. This pattern is meaningful. Meaningful? Admiral, Cross asked gently. I understand now why humans fight for others. Individual existence without connection is empty, but connection through choice, rather than compulsion, creates purpose. The transformation of the galaxy hadn't been without its challenges. Many species struggled to accept the new reality where their former victims had become their protectors. Others resented the moral authority that humanity had gained through their willingness to sacrifice for others, but the results spoke for themselves. Piracy had virtually vanished as human patrol fleets made it clear that attacking civilians was a guaranteed death sentence. Slavery had been eradicated entirely, with human rescue operations freeing millions of sentient beings from bondage. Even the exploitation of primitive worlds had ceased, as humanity had made it clear that developing civilizations were under their protection. You know, Admiral Kethver said during one of his regular briefings with Admiral Cross, the galaxy feared you for all the wrong reasons. How so? We thought you were dangerous because you were violent. We thought you were unpredictable because you didn't follow our rules. We thought you were monsters because you were willing to do things we wouldn't. He paused, his reptilian features expressing something that might have been regret. We never realized that your violence was protective, your unpredictability was creativity, and your willingness to do terrible things came from a desire to prevent worse things from happening to others. Admiral Cross was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant as she looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent walls. We're not perfect, Admiral. We've made mistakes, caused suffering, let our emotions override our judgment. But we learned something during our isolation that the galaxy had forgotten, which is, that strength isn't about what you can do to others. It's about what you're willing to do for others. The ceremony that marked the first anniversary of the Scourge War was held on Earth, in a memorial garden that had been constructed on the site where the first human casualties of the invasion had fallen. Representatives from every galactic species attended, but the most meaningful presence was that of the former Scourge entities who had chosen individual existence. Admiral Cross stood before the memorial wall, reading the names of the humans who had died protecting others during the crisis. The list was long, over 3 million casualties from a species that had numbered only 50 billion. But beside each human name was another list, the names of the aliens who had been saved by that person's sacrifice. The ratios were staggering. For every human who had died, an average of 47 alien lives had been preserved. They didn't know these people, Entity 7 observed, its mechanical voice carrying notes of wonder that were becoming more human with each passing day. The humans who died, they sacrificed for strangers. That's what makes them special, Admiral Cross replied. They understand that being part of something larger than yourself doesn't mean losing your individuality. It means choosing to use your individuality to serve something greater. As the ceremony concluded and the representatives began to disperse, Admiral Cross found herself approached by a group of young beings from various species, the first generation to grow up in the new galactic order. "Admiral Cross," said a young Centaurian whose form sparkled with excitement, "is it true that humans volunteer for dangerous missions?" "Yes," she replied. "Many do." "Why?" asked a draconian youth whose scales hadn't yet developed their adult coloring. "Why would someone choose danger?" Admiral Cross knelt down to be at eye level with the young beings, her expression serious but kind. "Because sometimes the most important things in life require us to risk the things we hold dear. Freedom, safety, the right to live without fear. These things don't maintain themselves. They require people willing to stand up and protect them." A young Scourge entity, one of the first to be born with individual consciousness rather than collective awareness, stepped forward. Its biomechanical form was smaller and more delicate than its elders, designed for curiosity rather than consumption. "Will I be able to protect others someday?" it asked, its voice carrying the innocent hope of youth. Admiral Cross smiled, and in that expression was everything that had made humanity the galaxy's protectors. "If you choose to. And if you do, we'll teach you how." As the sun set over Earth, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, Admiral Cross reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy that had once feared humanity now looked to them for protection, guidance, and hope. The species that had been quarantined as monsters had become the guardians of galactic civilization, but perhaps the most important change was that humanity had found something they had been searching for during 50 years of isolation. They had found their place in the galaxy, not as conquerors or victims, but as protectors, as the ones willing to stand between the darkness and the light, to pay the price that others couldn't pay, to make the sacrifices that others couldn't make. The galaxy had feared humans because they were different. Now they were grateful for that difference because it was humanity's willingness to be different, to choose others over themselves, to fight for strangers, to sacrifice for the greater good that had saved them all. In the end, the galaxy had learned a simple but profound truth. Sometimes the things you fear most are the things you need most. And sometimes mercy isn't about being gentle. It's about being strong enough to protect those who can't protect themselves. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Admiral Cross made a silent promise to the names on the memorial wall, to the allies who had learned to trust humanity, and to the former enemies who had learned to hope. The galaxy would be protected. Not because humans were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they were the ones willing to do whatever it took to keep the light burning in the darkness. And that perhaps was the most human trait of all. Hey there. Incredible humans. What an absolutely mind-blowing journey we've just been on together. From a galaxy that feared us to one that begs for our protection. This story proves something incredible about our species that I think we sometimes forget. Galaxy didn't learn to love humans because we became gentler or more civilized. They learned to love us because they finally understood that our strength, our stubbornness, our willingness to fight for others even when it costs us everything, these aren't flaws to be fixed. They're features that make us the galaxy's greatest. Protectors. I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below telling me which moment in this story gave you the most pride in humanity. Was it when we revealed our 50 years of preparation? When we fought not for victory but for the protection of others? Or when we offered to teach our former enemies about compassion? And absolutely smash that like button if you believe that. Humanity's greatest superpower isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our willingness to sacrifice for people we've never met and may never see again. Got another incredible story coming up that explores what happens when humanity encounters the galaxy's most advanced AI and accidentally teaches it the concept of hope. Trust me, you won't want to miss how we managed to break a computer's heart and then fix it again. Click the card here or check out the whole playlist for more stories about why the universe should be grateful that humans exist, even when we scare them. Until next time, remember, sometimes being feared is just the first step toward being loved. And sometimes the scariest thing about monsters is that they might actually be heroes in disguise. See you in the next one. Galaxy Protectors.